When my son threw a cardboard box out the front door and it landed at my feet on the driveway, I didn't move. I just stood there in the cold looking at the corner of that box, and I thought, 63 years. That's how long I've been on this earth. And it came down to this. I didn't know it yet, but inside that box was something that would change everything. Let me back up. My name is Walter. I'm 63 years old, retired pipe fitter, widower. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago from pancreatic cancer. It was fast. 3 months from diagnosis to the end, and when she was gone, the house on Birchwood Lane felt like a museum. Every room had her in it. The coffee mug she kept on the left side of the cabinet. The small dent in the kitchen wall from when we moved the refrigerator in 1987, and I wasn't as careful as I should have been. She laughed so hard that day. I never fixed the dent on purpose. After Carol died, I went quiet for a long time. Not depressed exactly, more like a clock that had been wound down and nobody bothered to wind it back up. I went to work at the hardware store 3 days a week because Tony, the owner, told me he needed someone who actually knew what they were talking about. I coached Little League on Saturdays because I'd been doing it for 11 years and I didn't know how to stop. I came home, heated something up, watched the news, went to sleep. That was my life. My son Marcus was 31 at the time. He lived about 40 minutes north in an apartment with his girlfriend, Vanessa. They'd been together 3 years. I'd met her maybe 6 times. She was polite enough at the dinner table, but there was something about the way she looked around when she visited, like she was taking inventory. I didn't say anything. Marcus was happy, or said he was, and I'd learned from Carol that sometimes a father's job is to keep his mouth shut and let his kid figure things out. In October, about 18 months after Carol passed, Marcus called me on a Tuesday night. He sounded nervous in that way. He'd sounded as a boy when he'd broken something and was trying to figure out how to bring it up. "Dad," he said, "Vanessa and I are in a tough spot financially. Her hours got cut and I'm between projects." He was a freelance graphic designer, good at it, but the work came in waves. "We were wondering, just temporarily, if we could stay with you. Just to get back on our feet." I said yes. Of course I said yes. He's my son. They moved in on a Saturday with a U-Haul and more furniture than the house could reasonably hold. I offered to put some of my things in the garage to make room. Vanessa said that would be great, actually. The first month was fine. Marcus cooked sometimes. Vanessa kept to herself mostly. I stayed out of their way and they stayed out of mine. The second month, things started to shift. It was more things at first. Vanessa rearranging the kitchen. Not wrong exactly, just different. My cast iron skillet ended up in a cabinet I had to kneel down to reach. Carol's good dishes moved out of the china hutch to make room for Vanessa's stuff. I didn't say anything. It was a shared space. I told myself to be flexible. Then Marcus brought out the car. "Dad, I hate to ask this, but my truck needs a transmission. The estimate is $2,200. I don't have it right now." He looked at the floor when he said it. "Could you help me out? I'll pay you back." I wrote him a check that night. He's my son. The month after that, Vanessa mentioned, casually, over dinner, like it was nothing, that the basement would make a great home office if it were finished. "The square footage down there is incredible. You could add real value to the house." I said I'd think about it. 2 weeks later, Marcus told me a contractor friend of his could do it for $12,000. "It would increase the home value, Dad. It's an investment." That time I hesitated. Not because of the money. I had savings. Carol and I had been careful our whole lives. But because something felt off. The way the conversation had migrated from Vanessa's casual comment to Marcus's specific pitch, with a number and the contractor already lined up. It felt rehearsed. But I told myself I was being paranoid. He was my son. She was going to be my daughter-in-law, probably. This was their home too, for now. I said I'd think about the basement. That was apparently the wrong answer. The temperature in the house changed after that. Vanessa stopped saying good morning. Marcus got quiet at dinner time. I'd come in from my shift at the hardware store, and there'd be a tension in the air that I couldn't quite name. Like I'd done something wrong. But nobody would tell me what. Then one evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to listen. I'd come in through the back door after checking on the garden, and they hadn't heard me come in. Vanessa was talking, and her voice was different from the one she used around me. Sharper, certain. "He's sitting on at least 400,000 in equity," she said. "The house is paid off. He drives a 9-year-old Civic. He clips coupons, Marcus. He has no idea what he's actually worth." Marcus said something low that I couldn't make out. "I'm not saying anything wrong," she said. "I'm saying he's got money he's not using and we need it. That's just math." I stood in the mudroom for a long moment. Then I went upstairs quietly and I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark, in the bedroom where Carol and I had slept for 27 years, and I thought about what I'd heard. I didn't confront them that night. Maybe I should have, but I needed to think. I needed to understand what was actually happening before I opened my mouth. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention. I found paperwork on Marcus's desk. I wasn't snooping. The office door was open and it was sitting right there, with what looked like a preliminary refinancing inquiry. My address. My name. Signed with a question mark. I made some phone calls. Talked to my old friend Howard, who'd worked in banking for 30 years before he retired. Talked to my neighbor Phil, who's a notary and knows enough about property law to be useful. Both of them said the same thing: be careful. Both of them said the same thing: be careful. Both of them said, don't sign anything. By this point, it was February. Marcus and Vanessa had been living in my house for 4 months. My cast iron skillet was still in the bottom cabinet. Carol's china was still in a box somewhere. And I was walking around my own house like a guest who wasn't sure of the house rules. I started keeping a journal, not out of some dramatic plan, just because I needed somewhere to put what I was feeling that wasn't out loud. I wrote down the date when I'd heard the kitchen conversation. I wrote down the details of what Vanessa had said. I wrote down the refinancing paperwork. In March, things escalated. Vanessa came to me one morning while Marcus was out. She sat down across from me at the kitchen table, my kitchen table, and she put her hands flat on the surface the way people do when they want to seem reasonable. She said she and Marcus had been doing a lot of thinking. She said the house was a lot of space for one person. She said there were equity sharing arrangements that made a lot of sense in situations like this, where family members were pooling resources. She slid a packet of papers across the table. I looked at the papers. I didn't touch them. What is this, Vanessa? It's just an agreement. A formality. It recognizes that Marcus and I have been contributing to the household, maintenance, utilities, and it protects everyone. I flipped through 3 pages without reading closely. I saw my name. I saw the address. I saw a number, 40% equity transfer. I closed the packet and slid it back to her. I need to have a lawyer look at anything before I sign it, I said. The reasonable expression left her face. It didn't get angry exactly. It got cold. Walter, she said, Marcus is your son. This is just a family arrangement. Then it'll look fine after a lawyer reads it. She picked up the packet and left the kitchen without another word. That night, Marcus came to me. He sat where Vanessa had sat. He didn't have the papers. He had a look on his face I recognized from when he was a teenager and had done something he knew was wrong. That combination of guilt and defensiveness that never quite settles into one thing. Dad, he said, I know she came to you today. She did. I want you to know, I didn't ask her to do that. Not like that, Marcus. I looked at him. What did you ask her to do? He was quiet for a long time. I just said that things were tight, and the house was the only asset that... He stopped. I didn't mean for it to come across the way it did. What did you think 40% equity transfer meant? He looked at the table. I know how it sounds. I want to hear you say what it means. He didn't say anything, and in his silence was the answer. I nodded slowly. I need you both to start looking for somewhere else to live, I said. I'll give you 60 days. I'll help where I can. But this is my house, Marcus. Your mother and I built this life. I'm not signing it over. He left the table without saying anything. The next 2 weeks were the coldest I'd ever felt in my own home. They stopped eating dinner in the common areas. Vanessa would walk past me in the hallway like I wasn't there. Marcus would say a few obligatory words in the morning and nothing else. I started spending more time at Howard's, at the hardware store. anywhere that felt like the air wasn't thick with something unsaid. Then on a Thursday morning in early April, I came downstairs to find a cardboard box sitting in the middle of the living room floor. It had my name on it in Marcus's handwriting. Just Dad, nothing else. Marcus was standing by the stairs. Vanessa was behind him, one step up, arms crossed. "We found a place," Marcus said. "We're moving this weekend." "Okay," I said. "I'm glad." "We need you to understand," Vanessa said, and her voice had an edge to it, "that we did everything we could to make this work. And you chose to be difficult." I didn't answer her. "That box is your stuff from the garage," Marcus said, and now his voice was flat in a way that scared me a little, because it didn't sound like him. It sounded like someone else. "We had to move some things to get our furniture out. We're leaving Saturday." He looked at me for a moment. Then he picked up the box and walked to the front door and opened it and set it outside on the driveway. I don't know exactly why he did it that way. Maybe Vanessa told him to. Maybe he was angry and that was the only way he knew to show it. Maybe he just needed me to feel, for one moment, like the one being put out. I watched him do it. I didn't say a word. He went back upstairs. Vanessa followed. The door was still open and I could feel the April air coming in, cold enough that I could see my breath. I walked outside and stood over the box. I thought about 63 years. I thought about Carol. I thought about the dent in the kitchen wall. I thought about how much I had wanted Marcus to be happy and how much that wanting had made me slow to see what was right in front of me. I picked up the box and brought it inside and set it on the kitchen table. I opened it. On top were some old tools, a level, a few of Marcus's baseball trophies from middle school that I'd been storing for him, a manila envelope that looked water-damaged at the edges, probably from the time the garage leaked 3 winters ago. I almost set the envelope aside. Then I noticed it wasn't sealed. It was just tucked shut. Inside the envelope was a folded piece of paper and a small USB drive. I unfolded the paper. It was in Carol's handwriting. I sat down. Carol had passed 4.5 years ago. I knew her handwriting better than I knew my own, the way her capital W curved back on itself, the way she dotted her eyes slightly to the right. It was her unmistakably. The letter wasn't long, maybe 3 paragraphs, but I read it 4 times before I was sure I understood it. She wrote that she'd been putting money aside for years, not secretly exactly. She told me she was saving, and I trusted her to manage our finances because she was better at it than I was. But she had never told me the full number. She'd been invested since the late 90s, reinvesting dividends, never touching the principal. The number at the bottom of the letter, with the account number and the name of the financial institution, was $412,000. Then she wrote, and this was the part that took my breath away, that it was meant for Marcus, that she'd set it up in a separate account, beneficiary designated, because she wanted him to have something that was fully his when the time was right. She wrote, "I trust Walter to know when the time is right." She had written the letter sometime in the last year of her life when she was still lucid but knew what was coming. She'd put it in the envelope with the USB drive, which I later found out contained scanned copies of all the account documents, and she'd put it in the envelope because she trusted it would find its way to the right moment. 4.5 years it sat in that garage, in a water-damaged envelope under Marcus's old baseball trophies, waiting. I sat at the table for a long time. Long enough that the morning light moved across the kitchen floor the way it does in April, slow and certain. Then I did something that surprised even me. I picked up the phone and I called Howard. I told him what I'd found. He told me to go to the bank on Monday and verify everything before I said a word to anyone. On Monday, I went to the bank. A woman named Patricia walked me through it. The account was real. The account was real. The balance, with 30 years of compound interest, was $412,000, exactly as Carol had written. The beneficiary was Marcus, with me as the trustee. I drove home and I sat in the kitchen again with the letter. I thought about who Marcus had been before Vanessa. I thought about the way he'd looked at the table the night I told him to leave. The guilt, the shame underneath the defensiveness. I thought about the 17 years I coached him through things. The time he called me at 2 in the morning from college, crying because a girl had broken his heart and he didn't know what to do with it. The time I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help him move when his first apartment flooded. He was my son. Before he was Vanessa's partner. Before he was whoever she was reshaping him into. He was my son. But I also thought about what I'd overheard in the kitchen. The refinancing paperwork. The way he'd sat across from me and said nothing when I asked him what 40% equity transfer meant. I had a decision to make. I called him on a Wednesday evening. He answered on the third ring, cautious. "I need to see you," I said, "alone." He came on Friday. Vanessa didn't come with him. I don't know what he told her. He sat in the kitchen and I made coffee the way I always used to, with the old percolator Carol had bought at a garage sale in 1998 and refused to replace. And I set a mug in front of him and I put Carol's letter on the table. He looked at it. He recognized her handwriting immediately. I saw it happen on his face, the way it always does when you see something from someone who's gone. That complicated collision of love and grief and something almost like guilt. He read it slowly. Then he read it again. When he looked up, his eyes were full. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. Dad, He stopped, swallowed. "I'm sorry. For all of it. I don't know when I stopped. I don't know how I let it get that far. I didn't rush to comfort him, not because I was angry. I was past angry by then. But because I thought it was important for him to sit in it for a moment. Carol always said that. She said sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone feel the full weight of what they did before you help them put it down. After a while, I said, she saved this for you, not because you earned it yet, because she believed you would." He looked at the table. "Do you, still?" I thought about that for a moment. Really thought about it. "I think you're capable of being the man she believed you were," I said. "But I think you got some work to do. And I think you know it." He nodded. He didn't argue. We talked for 3 hours that night. About Carol. About the house. About Vanessa. I didn't tell him what to do, but I told him what I'd overheard and I told him about the paperwork, and I put the information in front of him the way you put something in front of a man and let him decide what to see. He went quiet when I talked about the kitchen conversation. He went very quiet. He left that night without any resolution between us. Not fully. But something had shifted. You could feel it, the way you can feel weather changing before it actually changes. 2 months later, Marcus called me. He and Vanessa had separated. He didn't go into details. He said he'd been doing a lot of thinking, had talked to a therapist a few times. He said he was sorry again, and this time it landed differently. I transferred the account to him in August, after working with Patricia at the bank and a family attorney to make sure the transition was clean and legal. $412,000. Carol's patient, quiet gift. I told him how she'd built it. He listened to the whole thing. The late 90s, the reinvested dividends, the envelope in the garage she'd trusted to time and circumstance. When I was done, he didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "She always knew things before they happened, didn't she?" It wasn't a question. I smiled at that. Because she did. She always had. He asked if he could come for dinner on Sunday. I said yes. I told him I'd make the pot roast, the one with the carrots and the rosemary that he'd always asked for as a kid. He said that sounded good. Before he hung up, he said, "Dad, I want you to know, the house. I never actually wanted the house. I want you to know that." I believed him. I still do. Here's what I know at 63. People can get lost. Not just young people. Anyone can get lost when the wrong voice gets too close and the right voice gets too quiet. I almost lost my son. Not to something dramatic, not to drugs or distance or disaster, but to something quieter and in some ways more dangerous. Someone else's version of who he should be and what he should want. Carol left him money, but what she really left him was a mirror, held up at exactly the right moment. That was her gift. It always was. I fixed the dent in the kitchen wall last month. Then I stood there looking at the smooth plaster for about 10 minutes, and I felt the absence of it like something physical. Then I went and got a marker, and I put a small mark in the same spot, just enough to remember. Some things you fix, some things you keep. The wisdom is in knowing which is which. Carol knew. She always knew. Marcus is coming for dinner on Sunday. I already bought the rosemary. I still think about that envelope sometimes. Water damaged at the edges, sitting under a stack of old baseball trophies in a garage for 4.5 years, waiting for exactly the moment it was needed. Carol didn't know the specifics of what would happen. She couldn't have. But she knew people. She knew that kindness without boundaries gets mistaken for something else. She knew that a son could lose his way, and she knew that the truth, if you trust it enough, tends to arrive on time. That's what I keep coming back to, the timing of it. Vanessa sat across from my kitchen table and slid those papers toward me like it was nothing. Like 40% of what Carol and I spent our whole lives building was just a number on a form. And I almost missed it, not because I was naive. I'd heard the kitchen conversation. I'd seen the paperwork. But because I loved my son, and love has a way of making you want to believe the version of things that hurts the least. What I've learned at 63 is that real integrity isn't about being suspicious of people. It's about being honest with yourself, even when it's uncomfortable. I knew something was wrong weeks before I acted on it. I felt the moment Vanessa looked around my living room like she was appraising it. I just kept finding reasons to explain it away, because confronting it meant confronting the fact that my son was part of it. That took more out of me than I expected. But here's what I also know. I never stopped thinking clearly. I called Howard. I talked to Phil. I didn't sign anything. I kept the journal. There's something that happens when you've lived long enough and worked hard enough. You develop a kind of quiet stubbornness about the things that matter. Not anger. Just clarity. The ability to sit across from your own son and say, "This is my house, I'm not signing it over." And mean it. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from a life of showing up, doing the work, keeping your word. Carol had it. I learned it mostly from watching her. And Marcus, I don't want to make him the villain of this story, because he isn't. He's a man who got too close to the wrong voice at the wrong time and let it speak louder than the one he'd grown up with. What strikes me now is that he came back. He sat in that kitchen and read his mother's letter, and he didn't make excuses. He asked me if I still believed in him. That question took courage. It takes something in a person, some core that hasn't been fully worn down, to ask that question and actually wait for the honest answer. What Carol left him wasn't just money. It was an act of faith made years in advance, a bet placed on who he could become, rather than who he was in any given moment. That's what good people do. They invest in the version of you that's still possible. I put a small mark back on the kitchen wall where I'd fixed the dent. I know that sounds strange, but some things are worth remembering. Not to stay stuck in them, but to stay honest about where you came from and what it cost to get here. The rosemary is already on the counter. Marcus comes Sunday,